Hello and welcome to the talk, Practical Technology Innovation for Actuaries. Tony Pistilli, I'm an actuary by trade, but I'm also a medical coder. It's kind of fun. I give talks to medical coders and they recognize the CPC and don't recognize all the other credentials. I suspect it's the opposite for many of you. But spent a lot of my career working in data analytics and working with medical claims data and whatnot. And that's given me a bit of a perspective on how you can best intersect actuarial work with data work. And that's what I'm going to cover here today, sort of a framework for how you might think of actuaries and data intersecting, and actuaries working with data scientists, and analytics folks, and et cetera. Want to say at the outset, appreciate here that we can talk about these terms in sort of stereotypical ways, and obviously people's skill sets are broad and they can do all sorts of things, and so I think it could be helpful to talk that way, just as a way of sort of discussing issues and things you might think about. But obviously, the world is much more complex, and sort of pigeonholing people into this is your job can be ultimately unproductive. This is also my first experience with new formats. I'm actually recording this a few days before you all see it at the presentation. I hope to be present in the live chat with you guys, talking about the presentation in live time. By way of a more formal agenda, wanted to, a little bit provocatively perhaps, talk about what is an actuary first, and suggest reasons why actuaries should not use technology, and then talk about how actuaries could use technology in a practical and proactive way. So what is an actuary? I wrote an article for the Actuary a few years ago where I took on how we might think of what an actuary is as a profession. And it strikes me that we could say actuaries are sort of analytics professionals, or we work in insurance, but there's lots of actuaries that don't work in insurance. We can say that there's lots of actuaries that don't do analytical things, they do management things or product design things or whatnot. So I think it's useful to take a step back and say what is an actuary, especially to the degree that we're going to focus on that skill set. And in the article, I propose that what really makes an actuary unique is the way that we process problems, and specifically abstract problems that don't have easy solutions. The skill of an actuary is going to be to turn that abstract problem that doesn't have a solution through concrete simplifications into a problem that does have a solution. So I think a corollary to this is that actuaries tend to describe their pedigree through the mentors that they have or through key project experiences. And I think that gives you an insight into why this sort of mode of thinking might be what really distinguishes actuarial professionals from other professionals. It's not, being a good actuary isn't something that you can sort of pick up from a book or from school, though obviously those skills are important. It's really a way of approaching problems. And so you learn that from seeing how other people approach problems and how other people approach projects that you work in and whatnot. So I'd encourage you to take a step back and think of some of the great actuaries that you know, and talk to them or ask them, or just consider if they sort of have this pedigree that I certainly saw in the great actuaries in my life, where they could speak to their mentors or their key projects. And it gives you an insight into why this mode of thinking might be what really distinguishes an actuary. And I think it's helpful to again take a step back and realize that actuarial departments look really weird in sort of broader business landscape. This is something I learned when I was working in a non-actuarial department. I ran an analytics team for Optum's payment integrity product, and I was the only actuary in the whole organization. They had hired an actuarial consultant to do kind of non-actuarial things for them. They did a really good job, and I was like, gosh, we need one of these guys, and they hired me. I realized that actuarial departments, compared to others, are really top-heavy. They tend to have, if you think in terms of sort of the salary grade levels that often exist in certainly insurance organizations, you're going to have much higher salary grade level people. Many departments will have requirements on like the number of direct reports per manager, and et cetera. And often in actuarial departments, they'll break those rules so that rather than minimum of 6 people under one manager, you could have 2 or 3. That makes a lot more sense for this sort of transmission of learned experience that I think distinguishes the actuarial profession. But in other settings, this is sort of an HR cost management thing. Actuaries tend to be able to break that rule. In actuarial departments, the job of an analyst, management, and an executive is significantly different, and you see that in other departments too. I often think of call centers, for example. The person running the phones at the call center has a very different job than the person managing the call center. So different that you may not be able to sort of move from one to the next. They may be totally different career paths, even though you have that sort of direct management relationship. Despite that being present in the actuarial profession, where you're running the data as an analyst, you're reviewing the data as a manager, you're making decisions about the data as an executive, or something like that. Very different jobs. Progression tends to be fluid, right? You don't tend to. It tends to be easy to sort of move along this path in a way that in other fields, there may be much bigger barriers to moving there. Actuarial departments tend to have, exponential salary growth early in your career. Maybe not literally exponential, but certainly compared to sort of the baseline increases that other departments have. And that can in many ways sort of exceed your productivity growth, right? So in other departments, you tend to have a much closer line there. I think, again, this sort of points to how a mode of thinking might be the real skill of an actuary. You need to pay for that sort of learned experience that doesn't manifest in I can churn out more work, but manifests in I can make better decisions. There tends to be a delayed entry into organizational politics. So I learned this when I had a director level role in an actuarial department and had to be nice to finance. I had to understand what they want, et cetera. I had an HR person that helped me hire, so I had some of that kind of stuff. But then I became a director in a non-actuarial group, the payment integrity group, and suddenly, like, everybody I talked to was, political entity that I needed to have all these kind of advanced considerations around. And like my whole day was politics after that. Actuaries tend to be insulated from a lot of that stuff. Again, if you have a guy who's making really advanced decisions through their actuarial thinking, you're not going to want to expose them to that. So we isolate, insulate our actuaries from some of those things. And finally, it tends to be uncommon for actuarials to move to non-actuarial departments. In payment integrity, there were certainly some kind of subject matter expertise folks that maybe had more defined roles, but there's this broad group of just management folks that could manage a product group, and then they could manage an analytics group, and they could manage a operations group, and they move between the management of all these groups, and those skill sets were largely transferable. Again, I think this points to actuaries having sort of this unique skill set of what I coined actuarial thinking in that article. So this is a busy slide. I don't intend to cover all of this, but I presented a slide similar to this in discussions that I've had with pharma companies, and explaining the value that actuaries can provide to pharma, and helping them understand how actuaries maybe think a little bit differently than their kind of actuarial equivalent, which is HEOR, healthcare economics and outcome research. But for purposes of actuaries, I think there's a number of other fields that we kind of tend to intersect with, but are different than, and it can be helpful to kind of sketch out what that is. So, data scientists, IT, and finance are probably going to be the big ones there. And I'd encourage you to maybe use this grid to guide your thoughts, but think of in what ways can you draw parallels and then distinguish between these professions. Again, I think that can help sort of elucidate what is the unique role of an actuary, and as we start then talking about how do we deal with technology and such. Right, these are all technology types of roles, and so understanding what is unique about Actuaries is going to help us, best maximize our use of those tools for our purposes. So the kinds of things I think about are, what are your audiences? When I think of actuaries and data scientists in terms of audiences, they both tend to have sort of product development type things. They build tools that do cool stuff. Actuaries tend to be more at the forefront of dealing with routine finance reporting, understanding sort of monthly financials and whatnot. Data scientists tend to be a little bit more isolated from that. Data scientists might talk to the end user of a tool more than an actuary would, but not have that sort of business level, are we making money on this thing type of impact. What endpoints do they use? So actuaries, often what we're doing ends up in an actuarial model that produces a forecast, risk assessment, pricing. Somebody that works in finance maybe has similar type of skills, but somebody in IT isn't developing financial projections. They're developing tools that run operations and whatnot. So understanding where your work ends up can be a useful thing in understanding what maybe your goals are. The methods that you use, right? I think this is a huge one in terms of understanding actuaries and data scientists. Some of you on the phone may be more comfortable with data science tools, but maybe even because of that, you may have run into some of the difficulties you can have in actuarial organizations adopting those tools. There can be a real sense that actuarial tools have worked for however many years, and we don't really need these new data tools. So, actuaries might use credibility, they might use some kind of basic probability distributions and whatnot, but you could imagine, doing something like a GLM or something could produce a similar outcome in a different way. And certainly in the healthcare setting, which I think tends to lag behind a little bit more in terms of analytics, because the data tends to be much harder to use. It can be really hard to get actuarial departments to use some of these newer data science modeling tools and whatnot. A lot of it comes down to the methods that they're used to. So again, lots of data on this side, and I suspect in your own use cases you may have different considerations here even, but I encourage you to think of a framework like this and understand where in your organization you sit and what distinguishes you and what drives parallels to other roles. So that I understand, what is an actuary, I think we can start talking about why actuaries should and should not use technology. I read this story about IT in a great book. It has a terrible title. It's called Managing with Power by Jeffrey Pfeiffer. And it has, the version I have has this red cover with gold lettering in it. It looks like how to shove your will down your direct reports' throats kind of book. It's not that at all. It's actually this super nuanced academic sociological study of organizations and politics, and there's a few insights that I'll share with you from that. Largely that came from that book here. But one of the stories he tells is of IT and sort of the development of IT organizations. And I think it's helpful for actuaries to understand, and you'll see why as we go through it. So in the early days of IT, you tended to have a corporate executive who sort of took on IT as their main thing. So maybe it was an operations leader, maybe it was a HR leader, maybe it was the CEO even, but IT tended to be sort of somebody's pet project. There wasn't a lot of funding for it. It wasn't really clear what it could do. You needed to educate people a lot to get them on board, and so that can be kind of cumbersome. And so as a result, it tended to be something that somebody got excited about and championed, but it wasn't sort of a broad organizational initiative. As IT, the value of IT became much more clear, then it became a corporate asset that everybody understood, and it sort of got taken away from this individual and put into more of a department that was managed in the way that every department was. It was a strategic asset. You had professionalism rather than sort of some of these rogue engineers that maybe had in the early days. You had investment in infrastructure, which could build better tools, et cetera. And in this period, you saw really the height of IT's role in organizations. Right now, it was a legitimate tool, not somebody's pet project. It was had business power to say, we're going to go in this direction, and you're all going to use this tool. It had funding to do that correctly. It had training and support. IT developed the respect of everybody. And then, in this kind of third stage, which we're living in now, you saw the commoditization of IT. So as IT became a corporate asset that could be defined, could be measured, could be implemented in predictable ways, that made it easy to define, measure, and implement it in cost-effective ways, in productized ways, in ways that ultimately led to things like offshoring and outsourcing IT work and whatnot. You saw a move towards things like ticketing systems, right? The presence of a ticketing system suggests that you don't have an executive function that's sort of saying, here's where we want your organization to go, right? Rather than having top-down, here's what your priorities are, you now have hundreds of people who are vying for your time. And so you need a way to manage those tickets. You had things like standard operating procedures, and that said, here's how we do things. And you business leader, if you don't like how we do that, well, that's how we do that, right? IT increasingly sort of separated themselves from the business, from the executives who were setting the priorities, from the business managers that they were serving, and in all of that, you had sort of a marginalization of IT. So no longer is IT sort of this real powerhouse in organizations. It's a function that certainly in my experience in healthcare organizations, actuaries can resent having to work with IT because of these things. And so I think the real thing for actuaries to focus on in this is avoiding some of what I think were the potential pitfalls of IT. So, actuaries in the same way are providing a tool that other people can't do themselves, right? IT exists because people's computer skills don't let them manage their own database. Now, that's not true for actuaries, but for most database users, that's the case. And so you have IT doing it. And actuaries in the same way do things that other folks can't. And I think here there's a little bit of a cautionary tale for actuaries. So actuaries are in many ways similar to IT in terms of what we do, in that we do something that other folks in our organization can't, right? You have IT because they're able to implement things that your average business user can't. Your business user can use them, but they can't make them, right? Similarly, actuaries can produce results that other business users can use, but they can't produce them themselves. And that can be a commoditized role if the product that you're producing becomes the focus, right? When I think of IT in the organizations I've worked for, they manage things, right? They have databases, they have SharePoints, they have what have you. I don't think of my IT manager that helps me solve problems. I think of the thing that manages. And actuaries tend to be much more plugged into the business, and I think that's why you haven't seen sort of this commoditization of actuarial work. And there's zoomed efforts in organizations I have been in to outsource actuarial work to India and other countries, and you really can't do it. It's not because they can't credential actuaries in India. That's part of it. But it's because we have connections to the business that you can't outsource, right? You can outsource products, but you can't outsource relationships. And so, to avoid sort of this commoditization, actuaries need to pay attention to the fact that we're not just the tools and results that we produce, but we're the relationships that we have. And I started with talking about why actuarial departments are weird, in part to underscore this point that in other departments, there's a much broader understanding that relationships are really the power of business. Again, in those sort of managerial roles that I talked about, where they hopped around between departments, they were able to do that because they had relationships that let them plug into different areas. And so they didn't need to be an expert in operations or product design, because really what you needed from the guy running the product company, the product department, was that he knew the people that used the product and could connect them with the results and support his team in that way. Right? Relationships are really the tool of those people, and actuaries too can sometimes fall into what I think this tale about IT suggests, where you become the things you produce. Actuaries really want to, I'd suggest, focus on the relationships that we have. And so how do you avoid this fate with that in mind, right? Maintaining specialized expertise is one way, right? So again, actuaries are not going to be experts in sort of technical sophistication. Anything that we build, probably somebody else could build, right? It's really the way that we think about problems. Again, that sort of key thing I suggested makes an actuary, the ability to translate problems that don't have an easy solution into problems that do, by making concrete simplifications. That's going to be the tool that actuaries have that other departments don't. That's going to avoid sort of the commoditization of actuarial work. Right. This allows you to provide insight into a wide variety of fields. Actuaries can plug into all sorts of discussions and be useful, not just financial or analytics discussions. Similarly, you can now provide thought leadership and manage relationships in that way, rather than just providing a tool. Right? And I think you want to then think, okay, so how can technology pair with that, or how can technology not pair with that? Right? In this section, we'll maybe focus on the negative first. We'll get to the positive, but technology can really distract you from some of these things, right? I've worked with actuaries that build these really cool models that do really cool things, but even the actuaries in their own departments don't understand them, don't know how to run them. Right? Even SQL code can be a black box if it's 3,000 rows and uses cursors and other things that analysts don't know how to do, right? And there's times when that's the right tool, but there's also times when you sort of distance yourself from the people you need to serve by having this really cool tool that it's a cool product, but isn't a cool way to facilitate thought leadership and relationships and all these other things. Right? So you want to emphasize tools that facilitate knowledge rather than tools that produce a product. Similarly, you want to emphasize strategic value. So actuaries are going to understand how the business works in a way that is unique. Right? When you have to set a price on a product, you have to understand everything about that product, the regulation, the product design, the customer experience, etc. And so actuaries tend to understand things like health insurance products in a way that even the operations folks processing claims, or the underwriting folks that are underwriting it, et cetera, they don't have a sort of that holistic view of how this product works. And so you want to emphasize that strategic value, right? When you understand all of the product, now you can plug in the things you're working on into that whole product. Again, technology can have this effect of sort of isolating and solving narrow business problems at times, and you want to zoom out from that. Often, the way to accomplish sort of these more strategic focuses is not going to be by the coolest vanilla tool, but by plugging in maybe simpler tools into bigger framework. Again, building strong relationships is key to making sure that your tools are used, making sure that your tool is not just a product. And so to the degree that technology can produce miscommunications or over-reliance on sort of automated communications. Right? I was talking to an actuary last week who I said, hey, we should really put this in Power BI. And he said, I hate Power BI. And I said, yeah, I agree, I do too. But our clients love it. And he said, well, we should teach our clients to like the right tools. And I said, well, maybe, but maybe we should give our clients the tools that they know how to use and that they like. Right? That's sort of that automated communication, right? We produce an Excel spreadsheet that has these findings. That's what we send because we know how to use it. Well, if they don't know how to use it, then it's a bad tool of communication, right? There's also this dynamic. I hate it. Most actuaries do, but when numbers look fancy, people tend to trust them. And if you have a report that doesn't look fancy, it has all the correct numbers in it, people may not trust it as much as a report that looks fancy. Again, I don't like it, but those are the kinds of ways that you can use technology to pair with building relationships rather than technology that can sometimes isolate you from those relationships. To focus on quality and excellence. You've probably been in situations where technology facilitates sort of this, biting off more than you can chew. Right? I think of projects that have been involved in to move databases into the cloud that understood 80% of how a database was used, but not the other 20%. And so they could automate the 80%, but the 20% became the whole focus, right? I can't do this thing anymore, or this code that I had doesn't work, and now this whole process is broken, and we have to redo it, right? Actuaries should be attentive to those kinds of things and pay attention to the details so that the technology doesn't become the focus, but getting the work done is the focus. And then finally, I think actuaries are in a unique spot to understand the industry. Again, when you put a price on something, you have to understand your competitors, you have to understand where the industry is going, et cetera. And so, you want to make sure that your company is using technology in a way that keeps up with the industry, but also don't forget the fact that technology can at times distance you from your key operational goals. This is another key insight from that Jeffrey Pfeiffer book. Again, I've talked about relationships a number of times in this discussion. I think relationships are really the key towards leveraging your actuarial thinking. And Pfeiffer outlines these three types of power that exist in organizations. Again, much more of a sort of sociological study than the word power maybe makes you think from a business book, but I'd really recommend the book. He talks about role power being the power that you have largely because of your title, right? So I'm a director. I get to tell analysts what to do because I'm a director. They're my subordinates. I make decisions about them. I enforce policies, et cetera. Right? I get to do that because I have a title. That he says that's really the least effective form of power, right? Compliance is often obligated because I can fire you, but it's it's not genuine buy-in, right? Around the water cooler, they're complaining about the things that you're doing, and so a formal role is going to have limited influence. A way this may play out in actuarial organizations is I'm the one who sets reserves. I decide what the reserve is, and you, person in finance, you accept the reserve. Now, 95% of the time, that's probably how you should act because finance people are going to have stupid ideas about reserves. This would apply equally as well to pricing and salespeople. But there is a place for understanding that your role as a credentialed actuary has limited influence in getting buy-in with those types of people and the decisions that you make. So relying on I have exclusive control over setting this reserve because I'm credentialed and you're not, is going to be your least effective way of having that discussion. Valid, but ineffective. The second type of power is expertise power. And this is where I think technology can really really come into play, right? If you're the guy who knows how to use the really cool technology, you have a sort of power in a organization because you can do cool things, right? This is less true now that Power BI has become sort of commoditized, but if you could build dashboards 5 years ago, you were pretty hot stuff. This is moderately effective because now there's a particular domain that you can do that other folks can't. And this is kind of the expertise that IT had. IT could do things that you couldn't. You get respect because of the things that you can do, but you're not going to have sort of broader influence because your expertise is really fixed on the thing that you can do, the expertise that you have. And so, you're going to want to use that technical expertise to build credibility. You want to share that knowledge to enhance your influence. You want to sort of find ways to use this expertise to facilitate, getting involved in decisions and whatnot. But appreciate that expertise power may begin and end with that expertise itself. You may be involved in the decision that requires the expertise, but the follow-on decisions about how to implement it and whatnot, you may not be involved in those because your expertise is now ended. And so really where the most effective way of understanding your role in an organization is in relationship power. Pfeiffer outlines this is the most effective, right? This is the power that you gain from your interpersonal relationships. So the way that plays out in organizations is, I have a finance leader that I deliver reserves to. I meet with that finance leader every month to walk her through the reserves, to help him understand the problems. He has a pet report that he likes that I produce just for him because he asked for it. When he complains 3 months in a row that he doesn't understand this aspect of it, I set up a meeting with him to walk through it, right? The sort of interpersonal things you can do for people using your role, using your expertise, are going to facilitate relationships. And when you've set up that relationship with a finance person, now when you need something from him, when I need him to approve a rec that I have for hiring, or when I need him to to stand up for me, in front of the salespeople on our pricing or whatnot. Right? You've built that relationship up, and so that you now have a better chance of that happening, right? Relationships also have a real power in facilitating broadening your reach, right? When I have a good relationship with a finance person, now I can be his trusted colleague in all the decisions he's involved in, right? He might bring me into discussions that normally I wouldn't have been in. Now I'm exposed to new people. I can develop more relationships. Right? This really expands the types of decisions you can be involved in an organization. And more importantly, it encourages commitment rather than mere compliance. Right? When you have relationships with people, they're not going to do what you say just because you forced them to or because you're the expert. They're going to do it because they trust you. They think they think you're right. Maybe they thought you were wrong, and you spent time with them to walk through why you're right, etc. Right? This is sort of the foundation for real sustainable impact in an organization. Real thing I would underscore in how I'd encourage actuaries to use technology is make sure that relationships are your focus. Right? Technology can really root us in sort of that role power, expertise power domain. And you want to be sure that relationship power is how you're using these tools. Again, that ties into actuarial thinking. Our thinking is really our key resource. And relationships are going to be how you're most effective in organizations. So again, you're going to want to think about how to integrate your actuarial expertise with serving the key stakeholders that you have, right? Take a client-centric approach. Figure out who your end user is. This is easy if you're in a consulting organization because your end user is the client. But even in insurance organizations, you may have to think a little bit more. But you can figure out who uses the things I produce. Figure out to the degree you start adopting new technologies, how can this help them? A common technological thing for actuaries is to automate routine processes. That has its place. It's really good, but don't automate sort of those connection points with your key stakeholders, right? Um, there can be situations even where you might want to have a process that's a little bit clunkier, but has more involvement from a broader group of people than something where you just sort of press go and it turns out the final result. I think of some tools that we've built as products for our customers where we have things like Excel wrappers that press go on a model. Maybe it runs in SQL, but Excel is sort of the interface. They're smart enough to just go into the SQL, but you can make Excel look really nice. You can have documentation that's in there. You can, there can be a role for us in sort of having them interface with the Excel, and if that goes wrong, well, they give us a call, and now we can stay more involved with them than if they're running the SQL. Then they're sort of interfacing directly with the thing that's doing the work. Maybe they don't give us a call when it breaks because they're more familiar with it, et cetera. So the goal isn't to sort of make your clients unfamiliar with your tools, but think about ways that maybe you can build into the tool, ways that you can talk to people, that you can make sure they're using the tool correctly, et cetera. Technology can facilitate that. It can sometimes obviate that. I'd encourage actuaries, especially those who are kind of interested in data science and similar things, go ahead and collaborate across disciplines and meet the data scientists you work with and figure out what they do. But pay attention to sort of emphasizing your strengths and their strengths and understand where they differ. And something I've experienced is thinking that the grass is sort of always greener on the other side, right? That the analytics folks really don't have to deal with those grumpy finance people. They just get to play with data all day. That sounds pretty fun. But then you find out that when you don't deal with the finance people, then you're just sort of in a black box running stuff that you don't know how it gets used or why it gets used. So don't. If you get really interested in technology, just have a little bit of a check in the back of your mind that maybe other jobs struggle with things too. Again, the final product that you produce can be more important than the product itself. This is the logic behind something like an Excel wrapper to run something, right? The final product looks nicer, and even if it's not it's an old technology. Excel is. It's not fancy by any means, but that can be more useful than something that is more technologically up to date because of the things like providing client touch points and whatnot. Progress tends to come in spurts. This is something I've had to keep in mind as I join new organizations, and I joined not the firm I work for now, but I joined a consulting firm a few years ago that was still using Access databases. And sort of like unconsciously, even like I don't think they had an appreciation that this is like a mildly abhorrent thing to be doing as an engineering organization in the 2020s. Progress for them, I didn't stay long enough to see it for other reasons, but progress should come in spurts by moving to SQL Server or something that was better, and they still wouldn't be in the cloud, but you can imagine one day maybe they'll bring it into Snowflake or something. But all right, progress tends to come in spurts, and so appreciating that the technological progress you make may not be sort of a steady implementation, but maybe we got to get over this hurdle, and then this hurdle can help you to push your organization in the right direction without becoming that person that's sort of always pushing for more and more and more and more and more, right? Appreciate that unlike other things that maybe do lend themselves to gradual progress, technological progress tends to require a lot of buy-in, requires a lot of adjustment from the end users, et cetera. And so, moving from Access to SQL is going to be a big thing. I wish it wasn't, it shouldn't be, et cetera, but that was going to be a big thing. And so, had that organization moved into SQL, wouldn't have been the time for me to start saying, okay, now that we've done that, we need to move into the cloud because it's going to manage our costs better and whatever else. That was a big thing for them to overcome, and we would have wanted to let that settle for a little bit. And then finally, if you're the one championing some kind of new change, make sure that you're managing change effectively, right? Figure out how to deliver results early. This is a big thing with even just basic actuarial work, but certainly technological changes. You can have a real situation where you make a decision to implement something, and now you have 6 months to go behind the scenes and get it all working before you have anything to show. Well, in those 6 months, everybody forgot about what you're doing. You lost the buy-in that you had, et cetera. So you want to find ways to keep a project top of mind as you're going. Delivering early results can be a way to do that, right? Figure out some aspect of your project that you can say, hey, look, we did this, even if it's unimpressive to the whole thing, even if you have to sort of work in parallel ways to do something that isn't linearly in the timeline, but lets you get a result early. That may be worth it to manage this particular dynamic. I wanted, just in conclusion here, to give a little bit of a story of how I think this might play out and how you might contextualize this based on a current event. And again, my hope with this presentation was to give you a sense of how, with all the other technological tools you're going to run at this conference and elsewhere, how much you might layer that into your actuarial work in a way that is going to provide the most value for your career, for the organizations you work for, for the actuarial profession as a whole. And I wanted to talk a little bit about this Anthem anesthesia policy because I have some background for this in particular from my work in payment integrity. The policy was built to exclude from payment claims that had outlier time amounts on anesthesia claims, right, that were longer than usual. And the key insight here is that anesthesia coding is really quite difficult. The time component is what's going to drive reimbursement, and the time component is one of the hardest parts because you have a number of factors you need to keep track of as the medical coder. You have the basis of the code. Some codes are 15-minute codes, so 1 unit equals 15 minutes. Other codes are an hour code, so 1 code equals an hour, right? Some codes, it's one code for the first hour, and then you have an add-on code where every additional 15 minutes you bill a unit. So you need to keep track of the base code and then the add-on codes. You have rules for if anesthesiologist is present for the whole procedure, when the procedure starts and stops. If they start the procedure and then leave and then come back to end it, how do you count that? If you have 2 providers that hand off in between, how do you handle that? If you have a team of anesthesiologists that are all providing care simultaneously, how do you handle that? Right, there's all sorts of ways that you can screw up the time on claims. So assuredly, sometimes anesthesia surgery takes longer than normal, and you're going to mix in some of those types of claims with this outlier analysis, but 95% of what you're going to catch in something like this is claims that the coder screwed up, right? That 95% number is a number that I kind of know from my experience. Might be 90. I haven't done an analysis here, but that would be the kind of thing that I would really hope Anthem would publish. Anthem did a terrible job of telling this story, right? The media came out and said they're trying to impact anesthesia claims. Anesthesia practice, and Anthem had nothing to say, right? They didn't try to say anything. They withdrew the policy. An outside observer would give every indication that Anthem was trying to do something aggressive. They got caught. Media reported on them. They pulled it back because they're embarrassed, and now they hope just nobody talks about it, right? They could tell a much better story than that. I think, from my experience of a similar situation that was happening to UHC when I was there, but also, like my knowledge of how these organizations sometimes work, I would guess that they don't have a professional who both understands the practical business application here, understands the data, understands the operational impact, understands the providers, understands can tie together all of that, and also has the relationships with the marketing department, the legal department, et cetera, to sort of say, hey, we could tell this story and get that story out there, right? You could maybe stitch together a team of 4 or 5 people that could do that. But executives aren't very good at stitching together teams and crises and whatnot. I would guess that the ability to tell that story is disaggregated, and so it just never came out, right? Folks like me on LinkedIn are telling it because it's kind of interesting, but Anthem is flat-footed in telling that. What Anthem really needed to state here was that the key change here was that previously, when Anthem got one of these outlier claims, they would request the medical record from the provider, they would check the work of the provider, and if it was correct, they'd pay the claim, and if it was incorrect, they'd say, oh, you made this mistake, go fix that, right? What Anthem was proposing to do instead was say, if this looks wrong, we're going to send it back to you. Deny the claim. You can resubmit it if it's correct. We'll pay it. You can resubmit a corrected claim that fixes the error that now you found because they sent it back to you, and then we'll pay that, right? It's equivalent to when I have an analyst give me a piece of work that looks unreasonable. I can either go through the workbook and figure out the mistakes they made and send them an email with the mistakes. It's a lot of time on my part, right? Or I can just send it back to them and say, hey, this doesn't look right. Can you make sure? And then look at it later, right? Both are valid approaches, right? And specific to Anthem, right? They were doing something crummy in shifting admin to providers, right? They were saying, we're not going to, we're going to force you to really prove to us that this claim is right. Previously, it was on us to do that. Now we're going to have you guys do that, right? There's no rules, regulations, anything that says who should do that. It's up in the air. It's something that maybe Congress should clarify, but right now it's totally up in the air who gets to do that. And so payers and providers play these games where they shift things back and forth. And for whatever reason, this blew up. There's tons of other situations of this happening that don't blow up. I'm not sure why this one blew up, but again, Anthem could tell this story, and they don't have a professional who could do it. And is my guess. And I would propose to you that actuaries can really be the folks who can do things like that, right? I've seen actuaries that run marketing departments for life insurance. I've seen actuaries that, there was a company I worked for that was implementing a new claim system, and they had an actuary leading it, right? There's these sort of weird things that actuaries can do. And I think what allows us to do that is both we can understand the technology, of how you actually implement these things, how the business works, but we can also understand the business principles. Right, again, if you price a product, you have to understand all the product, right? We understand those kinds of things, and so you can combine that knowledge to really be most powerful. And health insurance is obviously a unique industry. I don't know if life insurers have these same kind of PR catastrophes as routinely as maybe health insurance companies do, but it's a useful thing for me to think about in terms of the value I think actuaries can provide for organizations. I think Anthem's actuaries, that work in payment integrity, the other payment integrity group may not have actuaries like UHC's does, but the actuaries there may be able to tell this story, and they're just not plugged in that way. When actuaries become reduced to just technological innovation, right? We run the models, we spit out results. You can really isolate yourselves from being able to provide that kind of value, and that's the kind of value that I think is really fun, and tends to provide the most value for organizations. So. With that, I think I'll stay in the chat and talk to any of you that are still here. I guess I'm not totally sure how this works. If you want to talk more, you can find me on LinkedIn. Happy to connect with you there. And we'll talk. Thanks for coming. See you guys.